Almost forgot the record button. That would have been an issue. All right, Ms. Mia Howard, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for asking. Doing as well as can be expected while
Yeah,
democracy hangs in the balance.
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Appreciate you joining today.
Thank you for having me.
You coming from St. Louis?
I am here in the Midwest. So
Midwest is the best, right?
I am still getting
Maybe
acclimated.
not. Not a
No,
quick yes. Not a quick yes.
no, I think there's tons of charm to the Midwest area. I just I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, so
Right.
East Coast, very much a Northeastern sensibility about me. And then spent the last 8 years in the South, and then off and on even before that, having gone to undergrad in the South. So, you know, so the Midwest is new, and I only lived here for 6 months before the pandemic started. So I feel like my reluctance is really just to say, like, I feel like I haven't experienced it enough to
Fair.
comment on it in a credible way, but I've enjoyed living here so far.
Is like Midwest charm, is that a genuine compliment or a backhanded compliment?
I think depending on who you ask, it's either. I've experienced what they call a Midwest forthrightness that I really appreciate. Like,
Interesting.
I'm a straight shooter. I say what I mean what I say, and I found it a pleasant surprise to build relationships in the region and to build professional relationships in the region for that reason. Like, I feel like I've been in meetings where people have real debate and discourse and disagree and then get to a better outcome as a result. And that's been refreshing.
And that's different from previous communities you've worked or lived in?
Yeah, I think in the South, there's for good reasons. I think there's a allergy to to conflict, but I think that sometimes that can get in the way of real progress in some instances.
Yeah, maybe like maybe not a perfect place. That might be the wrong phrase, but like an interesting place. Given like grew up in Brooklyn, Nashville, and like geographically in between, semi in between. Maybe I didn't major in geography, so forgive me if I'm wrong. But like, nonetheless, could be a good balance right there.
I think so in many ways. Yeah, like I got back to New York after undergrad and felt like it was just too much,
Right.
Which is what made me compelled to come back down south. And this does feel in some ways like it might be like the, Goldilocks, like just right.
I mean, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, which
Yeah.
is also considered the Midwest. So have a soft spot for any good phrases and or good people living in the Midwest. So glad to hear it. I love it. All right. So, pleasure of knowing you in Nashville, and then just like being a fan then, and then obviously still of your work. So appreciate you joining. As I always like to start a little bit of funness as always about our guests. And you are podcast famous with a fairly new, I think, podcast venture. Tell the good people about that.
Yeah, well, it's very new, so I wouldn't say we're famous. Although, given the topic of the podcast, maybe that's an aspiration. It's called Pop Junction, and it is a podcast I started with my very best friend, who I've known since I was 11.
Yep.
And it retraces what it was like growing up in South Brooklyn, pre-gentrification Brooklyn. It was a special place then, it's a special place now. And then layered on top of that, we talk about the film, media, television, music that shaped our upbringing and, and into early adulthood, the media we hold dear. So things like Sister Act 2, Love and Basketball, everything with Jonathan Brandis. We haven't talked about it yet, but I had an obsession with Leonardo DiCaprio, which is super embarrassing.
Interesting.
I was on the local news telling the whole world I wanted to have his children. So
I mean, it's never too late. Maybe, I don't know. Like, I don't.
No,
we can go there if you want. Like, I don't.
he likes tall, blonde women. So I'm not his type. But yeah. So Pop Junction is out there. It's on all the places you could download podcasts. And if you're looking for some levity in this challenging time, I would check it out.
So the best friend makes sense, I think. Is he or she still in Brooklyn or somewhere else?
She actually is. I mean, she's also traveled throughout the U.S. as her career has taken her different places, but she's mid-pandemic moved back to the Brooklyn area, which I think was one of the reasons that she started waxing nostalgic and came up with the idea.
And outside of like nostalgia, maybe like levity, I was interested too, because before, I mean, knowing you previously running a school, people would not use the word levity in running a school. I don't think, at least running a good school, like you did and some of the other work you've done. So like, is this like a creative release? I guess part of my mind was like interesting that like it doesn't really talk about, from what I've seen, like education or some other parts, but is this like the creative release and nostalgia to just reflect on those days and Leonardo?
Right. No, I mean, I think anyone that's worked with me would say like, oh, this is me as personality, like
Okay.
just fully on display. Like,
Yep.
as a matter of fact, a lot of the stories I say in the podcast are stories I've recanted to staff at various points when I'm trying to lighten the mood. But you know, I do think it is in some ways a release. I did feel like I had to be buttoned up as an executive, running schools in particular, where you're always thinking about everyone's watching, like the kids are watching, how you model your core values and things like that. And so that's still all true. Like, I don't regret having that sort of mindset in that work, but you know, it's been nice in the pandemic to let my hair down in other areas, proverbially, because obviously I'm bald, but to let my hair down and to be more authentic, I think, or radically candid about other parts of my life that aren't always so visible.
I know you said love and basketball, but has Boys to Men gotten a shout out or an episode yet? Even though
we have not. Well, they're from Philly, but we have not done a Boys to Men specific episode. We did do a boy band holiday jams episode in December, where on the playlist we made, their Let It Snow holiday jam is on the playlist. So I mean, we reference their work, but have not done the deep dive into everything awesome about Boys to Men, which we will at some point. We have a master list of all the media, and we realize that this podcast will last forever because there's so much to cover, and it'll never go out of style. But yeah, Boys to Men is on there, and we'll give it some deeper treatment.
That's good. You're playing the long road as a former teacher. Let that be a good foreshadowing for a surprise Boys to Men question you're going to get later.
Exactly.
So I know we could do a whole podcast on just Intrepid and the incredible school you launched and built with the community in Nashville or outside of Nashville. But for those that don't know you and your story quickly about Intrepid, just tell the people what we should know about that incredible school and organization.
Yeah, so I think even before talking about the school itself, it's helpful to just know a little bit more about my background. So after undergrad, I worked on Wall Street. Up to and through the financial collapse.
Lehman Brothers, I saw, I think in your bio, right?
And I worked at Lehman Brothers. So, you know, ground zero of the financial collapse.
No longer.
Yep. And I worked in legal. I was pre-law. So I wanted to get some corporate finance and legal experience before going to law school. And one of my responsibilities was notifying the deal teams when portions of their subprime mortgage portfolios were collapsing, because I would get all the legal service process related to those occurrences.
It was important.
Yeah, it was. It grew in importance, as you can imagine, over the course of my time there. And oftentimes homeowners, borrowers, in trying to save their homes from foreclosure, would be trying to trace the paper web of people they could appeal to stop the short sale or foreclosure of their homes. And a woman, I think she was in Montana, like reached me somehow at my desk. And this is me at, 24 years old, just still a baby in the workforce. And she was like crying on the phone, asking me to like save her house. Now, I, of course, had done enough research to understand how the democratization of homeownership had been sort of abused and
take us, you're 24, we're talking 2006, 2007, like before? Wow. Okay.
Yep. And she called in that window, and we could do nothing because we had already, banks like Lehman own the properties in tranches or bundles, and they're selling those things faster than they get them. And so, I mean, we no longer had an interest in the loan that she was referring to by the time she reached us, so we couldn't help her. But that alongside my own parents and seeing their journey of being hardworking and saving and trying to create a better life for me and for our family led me to create a school that was not only going to focus on post-secondary success, but that when you go out into the workforce, you deeply understand money and economics. And so that led us to start the school with a focus on financial literacy.
Could go so many ways with that. Thank you for the background context. I mean, I should have watched The Big Short with you the first time, so I would have had a better understanding of like what was actually happening. But I mean, incredible, or I guess just like all-provoking experience that you were there seeing it before it happened with one of the nation's biggest financial collapse in the history of the country.
And I've definitely had people say to me offhand, like, "Oh, you should write a book." I mean,
Yeah.
you know, because I mean, it's just
Or
such an
another
interesting
podcast episode I see for Pop Junction at some point.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I welcomed the opportunity to more deeply understand what was happening because I went to law school immediately after. So I was able to study what I had just experienced in my first job while I was in law school, which just like deepened my understanding, but also deepened my belief that, you know, at the time, and maybe even still, like a lot of our financial systems are just broken. They're designed for people with less information to be taken advantage of. And I wanted to avoid that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and you can talk, you know, as long as you want about the incredible results of the school, but I think too, like maybe discuss like maybe so often we hear like, you know, why isn't financial literacy taught in schools, or maybe it is in certain segments, but certainly not required in many districts and many states. So I guess like, you know, did you face those hurdles with that focus in addition to like what you guys are trying to do with Intrepid, and or like what do you see the future of, or I guess could financial literacy be taught in schools across the country in a more consistent way rather than just like one off, or, you know, it takes a leader like yourself to just do it in a community?
Yeah, well, I would start with the realization that, you know, all systems that we experience in our country that perpetuate inequity are by design. So the fact that we are not teaching our young people how to manage their finances, how to save and invest is all by design. And the way we pigeonhole students into certain opportunities post-secondary so that they're constantly living paycheck to paycheck and would struggle to even get to the point where they feel like they could save and invest is also by design. And so Tennessee was actually an interesting place to take that concern, because at the time, this is close to 10 years ago, Tennessee was one of few states that had actually just passed legislation to teach financial literacy in schools. Of course, 10 years later, it's still only a personal finance requirement for, I think, a one semester credit in most Tennessee high schools. So the law sat on the books, but they created standards for multiple grades in state policy. So Tennessee felt like at the time like a great place to try this experiment because there was a political will to do it. And we certainly heard that from parents. Like parents clamored to the school because they were like, you're teaching something that we know is being deliberately omitted from our curriculum. And so we did things like, you know, set up every student with a savings account. By the time they got into upper middle school, we asked all parents to set up 529 college savings accounts where we would provide matching with re-enrollment incentives, things like that. And by the time students got to high school, we were teaching off of Wharton's freshman year business curriculum. And I had a former professor at Wharton advise me on how to set that up for a high school audience.
Incredible.
So we started to do that work as well. But I think, you know, the school has since evolved, I think, from that vision since I've left the organization. And I think, understandably, there are other equally competing and important things to focus on, like, you know, socio-emotional learning. I think everyone recognizes in the pandemic that schools play a huge role in shaping the people, not just the citizens, but the full people that our young people become. And I certainly think I took a more like functional, will every student have the ability to be independent, you know, stance in creating the school. But I think everything we're seeing right now play out in real time is like, we need to go back to the drawing board on just like equity and students developing empathy. And so, you know, not everything can be elevated or important in every school model. And so I know that there's a different focus at the organization now, and I completely understand why that would happen.
But I mean, and then I think co-signing to your point too, like leading a school, leading an organization, you know, if you build it to focus on 9 things, right, you're not going to do it all the 9 well. So kudos to you guys for focusing and doubling down on that one and, you know, being that innovative. And, you know, to build off it, like, you know, with some of the family work we've done, you know, one of the most consistent feedbacks we get from adults and also for kids is around financial literacy, especially around like December budgeting and credit recovery and credit and that sort of stuff. And so I think it's still resources that adults are looking for, even if they don't have access to that, whether it's through Intrepid or something informally elsewhere. So still incredibly timely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we took it also into how we did college advising, right? Like we set ambitious goals around college acceptance. As a matter of fact, before December closed, 95% of our founding seniors had already been admitted to 1 or more 4-year colleges, which is really great.
Yep.
But that kind of metric has to sit alongside a metric around tracking the percentage of students that are graduating with college with debt below the national threshold. Like we need to really reduce the reliance on debt, particularly for low income students that can't service that debt, and make sure that they're making the best smart choice that doesn't put them financially behind the ball when they graduate.
Yeah, so important. You mentioned like that transition from yourself, but also the school, but and you know, I know a little bit from stalking you online and that sort of stuff in a professional way, of course, but like the new organization, new position, tell me, but also tell our audience about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so now I am in St. Louis, as has been discussed, and I'm at the Opportunity Trust, which is a nonprofit intermediary and education philanthropy organization, really helping communities, educators in the region reimagine learning. So St. Louis is, you know, infamous for its history and legacy of segregation and deep inequity. It's, you know, made national headlines within the last decade for police brutality. And against that backdrop, our schools systems that have been designed to fail students, predominantly students of color. You look back 50, 60 years and, you know, post Brown versus Board of Education, and you start to see the hyperfragmentation of the school districts as there's white flight into the suburbs, you know, people not wanting to follow desegregation orders, looking to integrate schools, you know, leveraging choice options, but to create homogenous hoarding of wealth school districts. And so what you see today is a legacy of that. And over the last decade, unfortunately, the gap between white and Black student performance in St. Louis City has more than doubled. And so it's getting worse, not better, which is, you know, there are a number of fast improving systems around the country that can proudly say that over the last 10 years, they've closed achievement gaps, and St. Louis is not yet one of them. So I was brought here to really leverage the experience I had launching and developing high performing school systems to partner with school leaders here, aspiring school leaders, entrepreneurs, talent facing organizations like Teach for America and the St. Louis Teacher Residency and others to really make sure there's a full ecosystem of strong support for schools to not just survive, but to thrive. And so that's the work I've now been doing for close to 2 years.
I mean, it's incredible and sounds like, was it the opportunity and the location? Because I think you said previously you weren't originally from St. Louis or maybe had like immediate connections, but what initially drew you to that new region, if it was new?
Yeah, so the history, like I mentioned, was really compelling to me. Like I saw a window here under the leadership of Eric Scroggins, who's the CEO and founder of the Opportunity Trust, to change the narrative in St. Louis permanently. And so that was a huge factor for me. You know, I've had the privilege of working alongside talented educators for close to a decade. And, you know, when you meet people that just get it in this work, it's, you know,
keep them close.
Yeah, you keep them close, right? So I came to the region. I met Marcus Robinson. I met Eric Scroggins. Marcus Robinson is now the superintendent of Normandy Schools Collaborative, which is the school district in which Mike Brown was educated. And so, you know, I just met high-powered, and when I say high-powered, I mean like keep the focus on children, data proven many times over types of educators. And I was like, yeah, I want to hang out with those guys. And so that's what I came here to do. And we're rebuilding a region that's focused on education excellence and education equity. So
That's so important. I know you said 2 years in, and it's certainly, and maybe presumably a systems level approach, and so won't be solved overnight, but tell us about some of the early wins you guys have been able to accomplish in those first 2 years.
Yeah, so we have 5 charter schools on track to open as not just autonomous schools, but community co-designed schools. So we can look.
And your role, I'm assuming, like you guys are the authorizer, or you're helping to incubate those leaders?
We're the incubator. We're the incubator.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So you can look at even Intrepid's origin story, and it's very much one of like outside philanthropy, finding people like me. I was still a relative outsider, relocating my life, coming to a community,
telling them in Nashville.
Yep. Telling them that, there's a problem and that I am the solution.
No pressure.
And right. And I mean, that playbook worked for a while until it didn't, right? We started to see around the country, like communities asking better questions, like who are you and why are you here? And how do I know you really have my best interests in mind?
Sure.
And so St. Louis is understandably skeptical about that playbook. And so we said from the very beginning, like, we're going to take a more human-centered design approach to school design and design what the community is asking for, and that they're co-designing it with us. So every entrepreneur in residence starts with a design team of students and teachers and family members and civic leaders that come together and go through a series of rituals to understand deep community need, anchored in research and then amplified by inspiration from high-performing school systems around the country.
That's so cool.
But you can truly say in almost all of these instances that like these are schools where communities had decision rights and input in what the school looked like, not just in whether or not to send their child there.
Important, right? And like always interested too in, from our work and even a little bit what we saw in Nashville was like around this charter district collaboration. Is that on the radar for you guys? How do you approach or think about that with the systems level approach?
Yeah, it's heating up. And so
friendly heat or non-friendly heat?
Friendly heat. Good heat. The good kind of heat. The good heat. So so we've from the very beginning found in the University School District, which is a suburb district to St. Louis, that still is predominantly students of color, and saw an opportunity for systems improvement in Normandy Schools Collaborative, which over the last 5 years, and if not longer, has been in the bottom 5% of districts statewide. We saw intrepid leaders, right, who are saying we need better solutions, and we want to partner with organizations proximate to innovation, like the Opportunity Trust, to reimagine these systems. And now we're also starting to see that the beginning specter of interest from the St. Louis City Public Schools as well, which would mean we would still be innovating and reimagining schools, but the governance model may not be a charter school. It might be an advisory board that is, sitting outside of, but alongside the district governance model to support those types of schools.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and maybe not a prerequisite, but important when like both sides and all sides, I think, are open to it. And I think, I'll borrow a quote from, I think, our mutual friend John Little on one of his podcasts. He said, "I don't care if it's Adidas or Nike shoes. I just want to make sure they help me run faster." And taking that label approach from sneakers, and then comparing it to charters or districts or governance models of any schools, like if it's good for kids and giving families an opportunity, an equitable opportunity, like, damn, if they are Reeboks or Nikes or Adidas, as long as they work, let's get more of them. And so I think it's so important.
And from the very beginning, the Opportunity Trust has always invested in every type of school. I mean, we don't make investments in private schools, but in every type of public school, we have made investments. And that was another reason that attracted me to the sector here in St. Louis, because there was a real willingness from the strategy and education philanthropy side to not get into that war of just automatically assuming this particular governance model is going to be better, but recognizing there's a whole set of conditions that make schools excellent, make schools excellent rather. And, governance has an important role to play, but you can see excellence in both types of schools. So
it's not a silver bullet, just the governance model. The people and everything else inside of them can do wonderful or non-wonderful things.
Exactly.
And I we've been going kind of high level macro, but selfishly, there's a school board meeting tonight in Charlotte around if they're going to resume. Right now, they're all virtual, scheduled to go back in person on the 19th of January next week. I think as of last count, 77 families have signed up to give their 2-minute speeches at the front of the school board meeting around what they think they should do. I guess I'm curious from like your leadership perspective and or what you're seeing in St. Louis. Is it safe to open schools? What you're seeing and like what you think in this like potential return to in-school instruction?
This is actually a great question that goes back to the conversation we were just having around governance and autonomy.
Yep.
I think if anything, the charter schools that we support have had a slight advantage during the pandemic because they've been able to make decisions that understandably impact a smaller subset of students. So
they can probably move faster, I'd imagine.
Right,
yep.
Right. And so they've been able to make decisions that say, you know, this particular campus, 80% of parents said they wanted some type of hybrid option. We can build that. At this campus, 70% of parents said they needed, you know, they wanted a remote only option. We're building that.
Yep.
And I see in the larger districts, they're making some kind of, they're making some attempt to do personalized decisions or some level of customized decisions, but they're typically grades band decisions. So it's like all the elementary schools are staying home or all the high schools are coming back. And so that already sets it up for parents to not really have the type of voice that they probably want and need right now.
Yep.
In what options are available to them. And then at the same time, there hasn't been, I've seen in some places, I'm thinking of like Seattle and some other places where like office parks and you know, all these underutilized office spaces are being thoughtful partners to school districts right now, saying like, hey, like you can use some of our office space for students that, you know, need a safe place to work if their parents are essential workers and they need a safe place to be during the school day. And I haven't seen enough traction here on that front. But all that to say, I would say it's not safe for most Black and brown students to go back to school because there hasn't been enough leadership and coordination around how to make those conditions safe. There are schools, a lot of private schools have gone back and have been back in the day-to-day since August with low to no rates of COVID transmission or containable rates of COVID transmission. And
but to your point, with presumably greater resources at their disposal to ensure those transmissions are at that lower level, right? Like not an equal playing field, apples to apples.
Right. And I actually haven't, I mean, my sense is that might be true, but it's also just about the fact that, you know, COVID is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in a healthcare system that also has disparate impact on Black and brown people, right? So it's like if you contract COVID in the schools, even if your school has done everything they can to prevent it, all of a sudden you need to rely on a healthcare system that de facto is subscribing you to poor, like worse outcomes. And so I think that has made people like me more cautious. And that intersectionality of like recognizing the race, class, and even gender impacts of healthcare in this moment. If I don't have children, but if I did, they would be right here with me at home.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like the implications are probably, you know, infinite is a strong word, but I think numerous in terms of response to COVID, but also just the type of questions our team is receiving around like, you know, with school districts in particular, you know, why do we all have to follow the same decision? You know, why can't one school do one thing, another thing do nothing? So I think more families are becoming even more just curious around how decisions are made, you know, if scale or like if larger school districts are the right way to go. And like, in not so much if districts are good or bad, but like, can things change within a district or within a large bureaucracy to make it more user-friendly and user-centric, whether it's in a pandemic or after a pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the example I used to reference was always snow days in Nashville, where like Jolton would always get hit and then we'd be out for 5 days. And out in Antioch, we'd see not nary a sprinkle. And
it's
as a charter school, well, as a charter school, I always opted out of just defaulting to the district's snow plan so that we could get those learning days back. Because we would have a bus driver go out into the neighborhood, see if it was safe. If it was, our bus would do the routes, school was in session. And now you're seeing in this context, which is definitely very different and certainly more extreme, there is a real need to look at decentralization further because, you know, it can't be a one size fits all. And we're seeing that play out in real time. Another bright spot I'll mention before I wrap this section is City Garden Montessori School, which from the very beginning of the pandemic launched a tiered opening plan that was meant to prioritize the needs of their most vulnerable families first.
Yep.
And they are diverse by design school. There's tons of affluent white families in their school population, and they have to have difficult conversations because that is a group that is used to being catered to.
Sure.
And they were told, no, actually, you guys are tranche 3. Like we are prioritizing sending students back into physical buildings that are the children of essential workers whose, family economics and, home situations don't allow for there to be productive learning happening at home.
Yep.
And from the very beginning, they just made an equity play that I think has served them well in preventing the learning loss that we're seeing everywhere.
How have maybe like the more privileged families responded to that?
In the privileged ways. Like,
okay.
So for some, right? So for some, maybe there's a moment of reflection and learning, but
right.
I think there's definitely been a lot of what you would expect to see when privileged people are told no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, one thing too, like we think and talk and work and practice a lot around kind of race and equity in our work as well. And I know it's a core focus for you and many leaders across the country, but I guess what's top of mind for you, and I know that's probably deserves a podcast episode in itself, but as you're thinking about leading this work in St. Louis and what you've done previously in Nashville and other places, and just with recent events across the country, like as race and equity are at the forefront of so many minds, like how are you as a leader tackling that with your organization?
That's a great question. We are talking a lot about coalition building.
Okay.
The conversations around school choice have been tribalistic and divisive for a very long time.
Yep.
And they often divide communities of color. They divide people that otherwise would find a ton of ways to be in alignment with each other.
Yeah.
At each other's throats, accusing people that ascribe to our approach as, some kind of like Davos, conspiracy theory, billionaire effort to privatize education.
Yep.
And everything has a kernel of truth, right? So I'm sure there are people for whom school choice is the ultimate end state.
Yep.
The ultimate end state for us is equity and every student having access to free, high-performing school options and diverse school options. Art schools that are rich and fostered passion for the arts, Montessori education, STEAM models, schools that focus on vocation and trade for students that express that interest.
Yep.
And so just like, what does it look like to build a diverse ecosystem of schools in which families don't feel like they're resigned to choices, but feel like they have a plethora of high quality choices.
Yep.
And within that, how do we make sure that we no longer talk about the identity work that really all educators should do before they say that they are prepared to work with and for our children? But also, how do you build that into the curriculum so that students are doing that work at the same time? And one of the initiatives that we started 2 years ago is called Better Measures, which is a effort that has over 30,000 students across the region getting SEL education and support in partnership with Panorama as one way to start to make the notion of what makes a school a world-class school a more rich conversation that's not just about test scores, but it's also about the climate and conditions in which students are learning, how much their identities are being affirmed, how safe they feel physically and psychologically in the learning environment. And starting to just have a more nuanced conversation about that. And partners like Transcend Education have been really instructive in helping us widen our lens of what a world-class school should be and looks like.
I got to imagine those, I think 2 years, but however long it's been happening, are probably already having pretty profound impacts, at least as they're rolled out and those 30,000 kids have access to that curriculum.
It's true. I think it probably takes a while for it to maybe filter down to students. But it is, I've seen it change the way educators talk about their work in terms of what they measure and what they do with that information when they get it at the interval, two to three times a year that they look at that. I've seen it lead to schools like Kairos Academies, which is a personalized learning school.
Yeah, shout out to Kairos. We know them. They're at CFA conference. We met them right before they were opening.
There you go. So Kairos, is part of networked learning communities like Valor's Compass work, right? So it's compelling educators locally to look nationally in partnership to learn faster and be part of really accelerated adult learning that can then shape and improve the learning experience for students.
That's so important. And I was just thinking too, like I just actually from one of my best friends in high school connected us to Anastasia Allen from Navigate St. Louis schools right before the end of break.
Yeah, so that's another one of the schools. That's another one of the organizations we invest in.
Good.
Under our priority.
Good Ohio people, good more Midwestern people.
Yeah, I don't follow sports, but they're upset right now, right?
Yeah, we're all hurting for a number of reasons. I was trying to go this whole time without bringing it up. This is literally my first hour. I wasn't gonna bring it up.
I'm not a sports person, so I shouldn't.
But you knew the hurt that would overcome all of us.
I just saw a meme that was like Buckeyes are sad today or something. I don't know.
Oh, I don't have words. Anyways.
I'm sorry. Okay. But yeah, she is from the great state of Ohio and leading work here to make sure that parents are able to access current information around the climate and conditions of schools, academic achievement profiles, and help parents make education decisions that reflect their values.
Great. I'm glad you guys are connected and working closely together as good people.
Yeah.
Okay, transitioning away from the Buckeyes. So a few rapid fire, hopefully fun questions to get us out of here.
Okay.
The most innovative thing you're seeing across the country as it comes to education?
Innovative thing, I would say certainly the anywhere, anytime learning is going to wind up probably being an enduring feature of what parents are clamoring for post-COVID. For some students, remote learning is working better than the brick and mortar was, and so we have to find ways to preserve that.
Co-sign that. One action thing our audience can do to ensure students and families have more access to equitable education?
Talk to each other. There's a lot of like silos and echo chambers.
How should they talk to each other?
Yeah, well, I think, talk to your neighbors about school choice. Talk to your neighbors about school. What matters to them when they choose schools? Do they feel like they have enough options? I think I would argue most people would say no, or they would say yes, but I had to pay X dollars in property taxes to get it. Yep. And that should bring us on the same page in terms of wanting then there to be better free options.
I'll say this and then caveat it that it's probably not true, but like it's school choice and the divisiveness around it, like with race, gender, religion, you can't pigeonhole one of any of those things, because if you talk about school choice, probably amongst other things too, but you can't find very many people to agree or say the same thing about it. You can get pretty heated conversations pretty much with anybody you talk to around school choice. And also how you define it too, because to your point, like some may not presume having the privilege to move to a new neighborhood is quote unquote choosing a school, which I think I would disagree with.
Yes, exactly. So it's like people just need to be having those conversations so we can develop more common language. And then ideally just get more people that prioritize equity in the conversation. Yeah.
Okay, last one. Square pizza. What does square pizza remind Mia Howard of?
Reminds me of the semester I studied abroad in Italy.
They don't do squares. I thought they do. They don't do squares in Italy, do they? With their pizza?
Yeah, they're Sicilian pizza.
Okay.
Yeah, squares.
Haven't been. No, I'll put it on the post-COVID travel savings plan.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I really like Sicilian pizza, but I didn't eat it very often while I was there. Sicilian
pizza is square.
Yeah, but I didn't eat it often while I was there. I don't know.
Learn something new every day. Where can the good people find you, Mia?
They can find me on Twitter, Neil Howard. Right now, there's a lot of political rants, so if you don't mind that, join me there.
I've appreciated your past few days. Some of your words and thoughts around the events of the Capitol and a few other things I've appreciated.
Yeah, I've been a sleepy Twitter person until recently, and that's the only place I've found like I just have felt drawn to the platform to just spew my thoughts and rage. But so that you can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm loving to always connect with educators that are looking for opportunities to be a part of our movement in St. Louis to build and sustain excellent schools. So connect with me on LinkedIn about those opportunities. And that's it.
So great. Thanks so much for taking time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.